Okay, picking up where we left off, we're on page 63. We're talking about the project organization structure. And there's one exception where perhaps you could combine things together. That's things like the legal department. Yeah, if you have a legal department, the legal department you could probably just have one that could handle both smartphones and appliances, as an example. Maybe the accounting people, the corporate accounting kind of people, but for the vast majority of the organization, there's no need to have them combined. There's nothing to be gained by combining the sales teams, as an example. Okay, so this is for companies that produce lots and lots of different things. And the next one to talk about is virtual team. So a virtual team or collaborative is one of those things where it could be temporary, it doesn't have to be permanent. Like you're going to work on a project, so you put together a bunch of people temporarily and have them work on a particular project, and then poof, that dissolves and they go back to doing what they were doing before. And with the internet, you can have you can have put together a team that's all over the world. Of course, time zones would be a little more problematic, but the idea is that a virtual team could kind of put together in a heartbeat, and you could do something for as long as it takes, and then tear them all down. Now there are some disadvantages. One of which is one of the questions of, well, who do you work for? And the answer is, well, I get paid by Bob, but today I'm working for Sally. It's kind of weird. If there's a discipline problem or something like that, and to tell you the truth, I've worked on virtual teams before, and typically if there's an employee problem, a disciplinary problem, or that kind of stuff, you just dismiss them from the team and get another. Hand them back to mama, so to speak, from mama to take care of the discipline. Okay. There's a cool little chart here on page 65 that kind of compares the strengths and weaknesses of these techniques. And yes, this is good information and a quite fertile resource for doing quizzes. Yep. So, traditional matrix project, the pros and cons. I'm not going to read it, but there it all is. Good stuff here, and quite possibly a source for test questions. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is this whole concept of innovation. And, innovation is usually the engine that runs, the key to riches. How you end up making a successful company is through some sort of innovation. They talk about different types of ways you can go through and get a competitive advantage. One of the things they talk about is this sustaining innovation. This is where I've got something going on, and what I'm trying to do is just make tweaks to it. I'm going through and I've got a product, and I just continuously make it better. Then you have these disruptive innovations, and that's where, I'm producing music on CDs. That's what I do for a living. And then all of a sudden, my sale of CDs starts cratering, and I'm completely clueless as to why until I find out that people are buying music on the internet. So yes, some things can just be sustaining, and some things are going to be this disruptive kind of thing. They make some distinctions talking about what they call re-engineering and continuous improvement. So re-engineering is typically one of those big things. Like, re-engineering typically could completely do your business processes, make changes to your organizational structure, make changes to your information system, make changes to your, all sorts of things. So re-engineering is big. Typically you hire a third party to come in to do a business process re-engineering kind of a project. And the reason is, first of all, it's big. And the second is you don't want to have any bias built into, well, that's the way we've always done it, because we're making big changes where you may decide, we're going to get rid of that division completely and replace it with 3 smaller divisions, okay? Big kind of thinking stuff. And the people that are currently in that organization would never, ever have come up with that idea because it's not in their best interest to do so. So the bias really forces you to hire a third party. So big things, changes in values, changes in processes, changes in computers and changes in organizational structure, big stuff. The other one is continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is just going through and I'm just trying to streamline what we already have. I've got an assembly line and we're producing, widgets. And so I realized that, if we were to tweak this and tweak that, we can get 10% more widgets out the assembly line. So it's just a little tweaking. I don't have to make any changes in the organizational structure or values or, information systems or any of those other things because it's just making minor tweaks. So one is radical changes and the other is those subtle changes. So here's a cool little table talking about the comparison of the two, and you think maybe a comparison of two concepts would be fertile ground for a test question again? You'd be right. So yeah, I like these kinds of things. It tells me that you actually understand. All right. Before we can get much further talking about organization, we're really going to be talking about organizational culture. And I mentioned to you guys before that you could be a completely white collar organization where people wear suits and ties, and very traditional value kind of a scenario. Think of the old style IBM, not so much now, but the old style IBM where they even had a dress code for haircuts and what color shoes you had to wear and that kind of stuff. I mean, you had IBM dress code and you had to show up for work doing this and that and the other. So that kind of culture is traditionally not susceptible to making changes. And so you need to kind of know what type of organization that you're in. So blue collar versus white collar organization. If I'm in a high tech industry, let's say that you're Apple computer, and you want to make a change to the way you do your time card. Most likely, everyone in the organization who's there because they like technology is going to say, "Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, no big deal. We're used to technology. We're used to technology changes, and so telling us that we have to turn in our time to a new system is no big deal." Contrast that with you're running a plumbing shop. And you got 50 plumbers that work for you, and you say, well, now starting tomorrow we're going to have a different time way you can turn in your timesheets. They're all going to go, oh no, man, we like the old system, because they're not necessarily used to technological changes. So this organizational culture is very important. They have some ways of thinking. They have this thing called the change model, and it's a little weird. But basically, what they're talking about is, for some organizations and some people, you can't just go from point A to point B. You need to go to them and say, here's our existing set of procedures, and they're frozen right now because they don't change. The way we turn in our time cards has been frozen for the last 6 years. And so we have to unfreeze. We have to thaw the thinking. We have to go talk to them and say, our time card system isn't the best in the world. And, get them thinking that, maybe we should come up with some alternatives to the way we're doing our time cards and get them kind of thinking. So finally, you get thawed. And so this thawed is where you can actually make some changes. You can say, okay, now that you've accepted the idea that perhaps we ought to change our time card. It isn't the best in the world. I mean, there's an awful lot of errors. This new system can make it faster and easier, and you'll probably like it better. And it's, you go through the whole spiel, and then you can make the change. And then after the change, you refreeze the specifications because, once you've made that change, they're going to stay that way for the next 2 or 3 years until you do it again. So this is kind of a philosophical way of thinking about, a frozen state. You thaw, make some changes, and then you refreeze the whatever the scenario is with using the new stuff. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at the refreeze. And I will tell you, if you try to jump from this one to that one without going through the middle, you'll just get people saying, well, what was wrong with the old system? It's like, well, and probably the old system was terrible, but you didn't bother to explain it to them. Okay. So there's a thing called a technology acceptance model, TAM. And the idea is that not everyone is going to be able to take technology in the same way. One is the idea that what's called diffusion. So I have an organization and I want to make a change to it. It could be that the change to this could be very widespread. It could just kind of go everywhere. So everyone's using the new time card system as an example. So that would be kind of a diffusion kind of thing. An infusion kind of thing means it's gone deep. In other words, it has, instead of just having a widespread use, it's really deep into the organization, and it's actually making some significant changes in the way we do business. So here's a way of thinking about it is, the perceived usefulness and perceived use of ease of use. Those are two important things that change how something like affect how a change is actually made. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of this and move on to talking about innovation adopters. You've probably heard, seen these kind of little charts about, the early adopter and then, the late adopter. So I'm typically like an early adopter. As soon as the new version of Windows comes out, I'm typically one of those people who's working on the betas, and then as soon as the day that the new one comes out, I jump over to the new one. So I'm one of these early adopters. But you have to realize just how rare that is. That the vast majority of the people are not going to jump ship on the first day. And so once again, if you're working a high-tech company, perhaps early adopter won't be that big of a deal. But once again, if you're in a stodgy old organization that's resistant to change, then you're going to have to deal with this. For example, at the university, we're running, as of today, we're running a version of Office that's 2 rev levels behind. They are not early adopters, and therefore they're kind of hanging in here. So you at home might be running Office 2016, but they're running Office 2010. Okay, so yes, you need to kind of know a little bit about this. There's a really cool little table down here talking about, each category and what the characteristics are. And so how do you try to talk to those people? If you have an early adopter, what are you going to need to do to be able to handle those kind of people? If you have late adopters, what are you going to have to do to be able to convince them? And so again, if your organization is in this category, what strategy do you use to ask them to change? Well, it's significantly different than if you're in this category. So yes, you need to know where you are along on that bell curve to be able to help your organization make changes. Okay. The next thing you talk about is the quality, and there's an awful lot of quality assurance kind of things and quality control kind of things, and unfortunately, they kind of get caught up in a hype. For example, you go to the bookstore, and there'll be, particularly if you go to the airport bookstore, because they have an awful lot of businessmen who travel, right? And so you go to the bookstore at a major airport, and they have tons and tons of books about whatever the latest business fad is, okay? And it's really bad because, your CEO is going to pick up this book and read whatever the latest fad is, and come back to your organization and say, well, by God, I think we need to implement this. And I've been through lots of these goofy fads, and some of them are pretty laughable. However, this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark before we get into that. And we'll finish this. Well, we won't finish it. We'll continue here in just a moment.